Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
We're back.
Good morning.
We're sitting down on the job today.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to talk today. We were really excited by some of the feedback that we got from you in the class about what you wanted to do with software engineering. And one of the things that a lot of you talked about was you wanted to change the world and make things better. And so we're going to bring forward a lecture that traditionally has been at the end of this class. We're going to bring it forward because we want to have this conversation over the whole semester.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, how does it unmute?
So what happens is,
So
this thing here is highlighted,
Oh.
and you hit the space bar, it turns to,
Oh my God.
it does that, right? So,
Thank you for telling me. Okay.
all right, so
It is no longer highlighted.
right. Can I just give you a minute? That's perfect. And I have to share the screen again. Share screen.
Here we go. Here we go. This is it this time.
Hello.
Three times a charm. Hello.
I think we're actually working here. You click there so it doesn't do that. Yeah, we had a lot of exciting feedback in our intro class about wanting to make software that makes the world a better place. So we thought we'd bring this conversation forward.
Yeah, and just a quick one, Juancho. What do you think sometimes gets in the way of that vision of making the world a better place with software?
Time, money, resources,
Yeah.
lack of knowledge, not understanding what complex systems can do,
Yeah.
emerging behavior, all of these things.
All of these things. More than we're even going to hit in these slides, but we can talk about it in class too. But the economic drivers, like you're saying, and just the amount of time we have. And when you go and work for a company, you're working within constructs, but you still have power within those constructs.
You do. However, if you're working for a publicly traded company, their legal responsibility is to make value for the shareholders.
Right.
So at the end of the day, they do have to turn a profit. But there are some things that we can do as engineers that will allow us to do that. And we'll walk you through some stories that will potentially chill your bones in terms of just unintended consequences. So in class, we'll have this conversation, but basically how, in your experience, how can software cause damage without knowing? And how do you, as an engineer, have the power to change that?
Yeah, and I think there's kind of that dimension that you're saying that, look, there's going to be pleasing your shareholders. And then there's also, working for nonprofits and understanding that when you are building technology, and I think we see this in a lot of these examples here today, these inadvertent consequences that you're just not thinking about how you're amplifying those inequities.
Right.
So yeah, this is a really important lecture. I'm so glad we're bringing it forward.
There's a recent movement across a lot of the big tech companies talking about this, trying to understand it. This quote from Deborah Rodriguez is quite on the mark. One mark of an exceptional engineer is the ability to understand how products can advantage and disadvantage different groups of human beings. Remember in last class, we talked about what a senior engineer does and how they're thinking about the business.
Yeah.
This is also part of thinking about the business because it's good business to not damage people.
there's a whole corporate social responsibility
Yeah.
element to things. And as you can see, the title that this individual holds is Head of Equity Engineering at Google. Very interesting that Google has invested in that kind of title leader. Because that's about stakeholders too. Let's not fool ourselves.
So software engineering is relatively new compared to all of the other sciences. It's about as old as it's about 80 years old, I think, in terms of it's about 60, 80 years old.
Yeah.
1940, 80 years old. But basically, we're still figuring it out, and the advances in this field have been so huge. We're still learning. So I'll read this out. As new as the field of software engineering is, we're newer still at understanding the impact it has on underrepresented people and diverse societies. We must recognize the increasing imbalance of power between those who make development decisions and the impact of the world, and those who simply must accept and live with those decisions and sometimes disadvantage already marginalized communities globally. And we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think the big thing here is, it's not that these software developers are sitting down and making decisions that are like, oh, gee, the ramifications of this may have a negative impact on certain groups of people. They're not. A lot of times it really is just, oh, okay, we have to do something about, we'll approximate this thing here. And it's that thinking through those consequences, that step that doesn't happen, that really is the one that we'll see a lot of stories about. And that's where we can really benefit from starting our projects with that in mind.
And I know that there's an absolutely fantastic example of this that's playing out right now. A while back, one person decided that they wanted to make this thing called Bitcoin, and they had good intentions. They wanted to have a trading system that was independent from governments and independent from, but that led to the development of the blockchain technology, and it turns out that has now been abused with the NFT scandals that went on last year. He never intended for that to happen, but he pushed and developed that technology that was then abused ad hoc through a whole bunch of Ponzi schemes that we saw last year. Thankfully, the NFT thing is mostly over at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so lots of things like that, and hopefully in class you guys can start to think about other ways in which you've seen technology kind of take off in a direction that had inadvertent consequences.
So we're just going to go through some case studies. This one here is interesting because it looks good until you open and look inside. So there was a system that was built and used, it was called, in the States, it was called the Compass Sentencing Tool. And it was supposed to help judges determine whether someone was high risk, and in which case they would get a longer jail sentence, or low risk, in which case they would get a lower jail sentence, which is great intention. And when you look across the whole population where this was deployed over, it looks pretty good. It looks like it was balanced. About 30% of the people were labeled high risk, but they weren't. So there was a 30% mistake in that direction. So they got longer sentences, and then there was about 37% of people who were labeled low risk, but they came out of jail and immediately reoffended. So it's the fact that those two numbers match is good. Those numbers should be lower, but those matches. However, if you look inside this and you look at you just divide it by race in the States between white and black defendants, you'll notice that Black defendants served more prison time than white people. So the system was making mistakes in favor of white people. 47% of them were given lower sentences when they should have been given longer sentences because they came out of jail and immediately reoffended. And there was a 44% of the Black defendants did not reoffend when they came out of jail. I went to jail, I don't want to do that again. I'm done.
Yeah, and I think this study certainly, you can sort of think, oh, that's kind of massive. How on earth was this software adopted without it being tested more?
Well, it was probably tested like that,
Yeah,
right? And the problem is that it was using data that was biased,
yeah.
right? And so the software itself was not the problem. It was the data that was being made on the decisions.
Well, collecting data
Collecting data is a challenge.
is a challenge. But also like maybe, the takeaway here is you gotta dig deeper to do that kind of testing to
Yeah.
make sure that you're not building in biases. And it's so hard because, you're just doing your job, and those first set of numbers, it looks like it's going pretty well. So let's deploy this system. But even just being able to identify that we don't have enough data to know if this is going to be effective in the way we think it's going to be, might be the thing that people can do when they're thinking about how do they impact change within larger organizations when they're a junior engineer.
Yeah. And there's a company out there that made a watch that measures your heartbeat, but it didn't work with Black people.
Well, lots of facial recognition stories about that as well. Coded Bias is a great movie. Yeah.
So here's one of the things that we've all learned, and if you haven't learned it, you should know this.
Yeah.
Is that as you poke around on websites, they are tracking your information, and they'll change the price based on what you've done. So here's the incognito mode is on the top row, and the signed in mode, where they can see all of your history, is on the bottom row. So you'll see that based on your data, maybe you've been looking at monitors for a while, and Amazon has decided that they're going to, that you're highly likely to buy a TV. And so they're going to charge you $9 more for the Samsung and $4 more for the Acer.
Is that unethical?
I don't know. That's a really good question.
Because we're talking about ethics.
I think it's worth knowing that it goes on.
Yes, I agree.
But Amazon is in the business of selling things and making a profit.
And I think you said at the beginning here, which is something, the reality of the situation is companies have to be responsible to their stakeholders to deliver profit.
Right.
How do they deliver profit? They do things like this, and it's not airplane tickets too, like so many things like this. And though it's easy for us to go, well, in a perfect world, we wouldn't do these kinds of things. But I think we have to be careful, or I learned from you really, that it's not a perfect world necessarily. We live in a capitalistic society. These companies have to make money. And how do they do it? I think a lot of the examples we look at here, it's not necessarily that it's unethical, but maybe, but it is business practices and ecosystems like that. We have to.
Well, if I want to buy a pair of trousers, I can walk into the Bay, or I can walk into Harry Rosen.
Right.
Right. And I could buy exactly the same pair of trousers, but Harry Rosen is going to charge me more.
Yep.
That's my choice.
Yep.
So there's, you're right. It's not unethical, but it's definitely interesting.
And we sure need to know if we're working with, implementations like this, and in particular for marginalized communities, we're developing code for them or something and interfacing with systems like this. We need them to know these things. We need them to know that incognito mode exists, and yeah.
Well, there is actually an example coming up of the how this plays out, that it impacts poor people, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
You all travel a lot to go home. Do your search for your flights in incognito mode, delete your cookies, delete your search history. Absolutely, you'll get cheaper flights.
Yeah, sorry that I gave that away before this slide came up. And I think that is so huge. And it's so frustrating when you're looking and you see the prices going up. It's like,
So this is what I was talking about. Algorithmic bias can discriminate against poor consumers. There's a whole bunch of words there, but let's kind of walk through this. So what this study showed here was that if you live closer to a retail store, you're going to get a better price. And so how does that work? What basically, if you think about a city like Staples, Office Max, and Best Buy, you don't want to put those stores in high crime areas because shoppers won't go there.
Right.
It's just the reality. It's good business sense. And so you end up in a situation like we have here that you have this gathering of stores in a nicer neighborhood, and they're competing with each other.
Yeah.
So they offer good deals in those stores, and but if you live outside of that area, so basically, if you go online in that area, they are competing for you, so they're going to give you a good price. But if you live outside, if you live out over here somewhere, they don't really care about your business because they're not competing in that hot market. So they will give you a higher price because if you're going to come in, you get that. And so, but what happens, because these stores are in nice neighborhoods, that's where wealthy people live. The wealthy people get better prices than the poor people who live outside of these neighborhoods. None of these decisions were done on, nobody decided we're going to make poor people pay more.
No.
But it's a consequence. Again, is that ethical or not?
Yeah. You know, I think today just bringing these things up and understanding a lot of it has these forces that are economic competition, you know, gas prices, airplane prices, all of these things. It's understanding that broader ecosystem. Of course, if you were to say, oh, I'm going to write up some software to be able to serve up these products to people that are coming in, you know, you would never discriminate. No. Right? That was not something that our students are, you know, I think that the idea being that it's that broader picture that we need to bring into effect and have these conversations and understand that it can come into decisions that we're making about software and how it's running and being able to, as a junior developer maybe, identify that those might be factors, right, that this might actually discriminate against poorer populations if we do it based on area code.
Yeah, and the thing is, you could potentially fix it by just offering the same deals to everybody, right, and not just based on location. But again, it may be that you identify this, you flag it up to the business people, and they make the decision. This is how we're going to do it.
Right. It's not up to you to program up the algorithm for it. It's for you to identify that this may be going on. This may be discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So AI systems can have very serious impacts on climate. We're asking you to use ChatGPT. But every time you use ChatGPT, there's a whole bunch of computers that are doing work there. The consumption of fuel, if you know, one traveler going from New York to San Francisco uses about 1,900 pounds, emits about 1,900 pounds of CO2. The average car emits 100,000 pounds of CO2. Training a transformer for a big neural network search takes about 5 cars worth of lifetime. Now, these numbers, you have to be careful with these numbers because you don't train a neural network every time you do a query.
Right.
Right. These are so it could be that that's mitigated over time. So it is expensive to train a neural network, but so when you see numbers like this, go and dig into them and see what does it mean and how is this impacting our planet?
Yeah.
But basically, the training of GPT-3 is equivalent to getting in your car and driving to the moon and driving back.
Hopefully it won't take that long. But one thing to bring up here too is that, as you're saying, Juancho, it's, even, carbon offsets and how these equations play out, how the economic realities play out, how climate impact plays out are very big issues. And again, you walk into the workplace and somebody says, yeah, let's train something to do this thing. And you kind of go, wait a minute, this is the cost of, be careful with that. And there's certainly lots of very public stories about people that did stand up and say, we got to be careful here, and lost their jobs because of it. So it's about knowing that these equations are part of what we do.
Right.
And that they're very complicated. And as a junior developer, even as a senior software engineer, maybe, you don't always have the right to say, well, let's not do this because of that. That's a very big corporate decision that has to be made. But raising the issue is what you can do. Wow. And pointing to studies to say, well, let's just talk about, this isn't conclusive, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, and there's actually a very real example of that happening right now. 2 days ago, Unity, the game engine, announced that they were going to change their structure for payments.
Yes.
And there was a huge backlash, but primarily because people didn't read the actual fine print.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically they were saying, if your game is really, really, really successful, we're going to ask you to pay a little bit extra. Yeah. And the developers all reacted, said, oh, you're asking us to pay money, and they all reacted. So there's a whole conversation. But again, people they didn't pause and think about the numbers. They just reacted to, and then they react. So someone posted something, big numbers, and the other person said, oh, those are big numbers. We hate Unity and stuff like that. Yeah. And there's nothing more horrible than the gaming industry backlash whenever it happens.
Well, and you would know, but I did hear about that too, and I heard about people leaving Unity to go to another open source platform, and this was just maybe what some people refer to as a tipping point, that there is a lot of people already concerned about Unity not being able to deliver on some things or something. And not that this is a Unity story necessarily. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. I think your point that it's about the fine print here, that Unity was doing what we were talking about in terms of, responsibility to their stakeholders. There are some people that are making a lot of money using Unity products that aren't paying their maybe share of it. And so again, a bigger economic business decision that, developers maybe reacted very quickly to and not appreciating the bigger ecosystem.
This is the most horrible story that we're going to talk about. This one is, every time I read this story, I just make me chill. So Domino's had a website that was difficult for blind people to use. Now, by blind people, there's a legal definition of blindness. That means that if you're completely blind, you can't use the website, but there's voiceover you could use, et cetera, et cetera. But this person was impaired with his vision. And so he said, hey, can you actually fix the website? And Domino's said, no, we're not going to fix the website. And they invested thousands of dollars fighting this because they did not care. And it's just a crazy thing that happens. So it kind of shows you that some corporations will actually stick their feet in the mud and go with profit first.
Yes.
Profit first.
Yep. And we know that that's part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that maybe there are other things that start to come into play, like accessibility standards that need to be met, and screen readers being able to use those standards. And a lot of them, we know they're out there, and a lot of websites don't use them, so, but really, definitely something, Domino's was not the only offender in these kinds of.
But I think Domino's holds the record for fighting it.
Furthest, to take it to the Supreme Court.
Here's my favorite one. This one was interesting. It actually, well, what's interesting, there's two things that are interesting, but basically what happened here is that the way that the government tests how much junk is coming out of the back of your car is they have a set of standard tests where they take you into a garage, they put you on spinning wheels, and then they rev the engine, they go fast, they do 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and the software in the car can actually detect when this bunch of tests is going to be done. And so what Volkswagen did, they had a software engineer write code such that if the test was occurring, it would change the behavior of the car, because it's all electronically driven, such that it would pass the test. Now that means that the car would be, if the car is running very efficiently, it's not very zippy, it doesn't go very fast, it doesn't have a lot of power. And so people buy the car not to be efficient, but to go fast, so to get somewhere in time. So what the software does is, if you're not testing it, it actually makes the car more responsive, it makes it go faster, which means that you're putting more junk out. And this was in all the Volkswagen cars, because you don't know which one's going to be testing it. The whole story of how this was detected and all of that stuff, I think it was an individual who actually put a measure on his thing and exposed it. But what's interesting is that every German company was doing exactly the same thing.
Yes, it wasn't just Volkswagen.
Yeah, Volkswagen took the fall for it, and Mercedes and BMW and Audi, they all went, yeah, okay, we were doing that too, and they just quietly settled. But it's interesting because this was a scandal that wasn't, like, nobody really cared. Consumers didn't care.
No, yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That again, like that, just the context for some of these things, where you can look at it from one perspective and say, that is so unethical.
Yeah. And I think in this case, it is unethical. You're absolutely cheating.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I remember driving into these stations and getting tested before there were standards put in place, and
right.
So can I be confident now that when I'm not getting tested, and as my car is getting older, that I am not exceeding emission standards? Or do people just not care anymore? Or should I be driving an electric vehicle? Let's put it that way. Yeah. So.
But I think in this particular case, the software engineer who wrote this code knew that they were writing code to go around the law.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it would be very hard for them not to know, and yet at the same time, I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know if they knew. Somebody knew, but was it the software engineer, or was it someone higher up?
Yeah, whoever did the specifications.
Yeah. But said that it would be something that would be used under these conditions.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that our car is really efficient during the test.
Yeah. So as a junior software engineer, if you're asked to do something where you're like, oh, but this could also circumvent those tests, that might be something to bring up.
Yep. This led to a $14.7 billion settlement, which most of it went to lawyers, and the CEO of Volkswagen stepped down with a golden parachute.
Yeah.
So, there's a whole bunch of these kind of stories. We've seen the Compass sentencing tool and how it impacted people from different backgrounds because the data that it was built on was biased. We've seen stores making marketing decisions of how to market things based on your location. Inclusive, we've seen evil companies like Domino's Pizza Ever since I heard about this story, I don't buy Domino's Pizza anymore. It's just a choice, but, and then Volkswagen, there's acres and acres and acres of Volkswagens in the States that are being abandoned, that Volkswagen bought back, and they're just sitting there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so.
How do you recycle a Volkswagen? I think the one thing that isn't on that slide is the CO2 emissions from
the ChatGPT.
Yeah, and putting that up against the Volkswagen story is actually kind of interesting to kind of go, hey, you know, because that one, that lower quadrant is about environmental injustice, kind of, and the other ones are about marginalized groups that are hurt by some decisions. And so again, it's that bigger ecosystem. Volkswagen and all of the evaders, oh my goodness. But then, you know, our own discipline is also going to be facing this kind of thing.
So how do we determine what the right thing is? It's really difficult, and we're not telling you that there's a right way to do it. We're not telling you that you're going to be able to change it. We're just asking you to continue to think about this, right? And we are seeing changes. Like 10 years ago, none of the companies were doing anything about climate change. And now it's become very obvious that you can make money by addressing climate change.
Yes.
So it will change.
Well, and one thing about that too, you know, when you said you can make money by addressing climate change, because of the fact that, you know, as the world evolves, different people are the, you know, critical stakeholders. I think younger generations than us actually are going to invest differently because of what's happening for their children and their grandchildren and the abuse of things. And I think that whole idea of you might not be able to make the decisions that make the change, but you can influence the people who do. And also, if you actually are working directly with marginalized groups, how do you do it better?
Yeah, the great thing about us going back to the office is that there's an awful lot of business decisions that are made in the coffee station, where someone comes and says, hey, I was thinking about this. And so, you know, take those opportunities to build networks within the companies that you work in so that your voice can actually be amplified. Find out how to, you know, speak to your principal engineer. We talked about, you know, making sure that you're well known within your company. If you are well known and respected within your company, your opinion counts for something, so that you can carry that. And so what we talked about in the last class about presenting yourself and having a voice, knowing how that all works, that all part here as well.
Absolutely, and I think that idea of it's about people making decisions, and sometimes again it's not about that they think they're doing something evil. It's that they didn't consider something, you know, that this could have that impact.
Yeah. So here's another story about there's no evil engineer in this one. There's just a decision, but this story here is about a horrible impact of a very, very minor decision. And so MaxMind is a company that sells you a mapping from IP address, internet protocol addresses, to a geographical location. And they gather that by listening to traffic on the internet, and they've used their own data, and they have a service where you can, if you know, that those companies that were trying to track where you're looking at the web from to give you a higher price, lower price, they were probably using MaxMind. Okay. And so there's always some new device that comes on and that hasn't entered their database. And that means that they don't have a way of determining where it is.
Right.
So they default to the center of the United States. Right? So if they don't have the data for your IP address, eventually they will, and then that IP address will get located to something like that. But what do you do if you don't have, you want to the customers want an address.
Yes, they
So-
put a location on a map that,
So in this particular case, they decided to use the geographical center of America. But those are horrible numbers. They don't actually fit well within the computer. And so they decided to pick these two numbers, 30 degrees of latitude and minus 97 degrees of longitude.
Yeah.
I think that's what they are.
it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
So it was just, there's no reason, and this story could go the same way either way, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out that that particular address, if you go Google it on, if you go to Google Maps and you Google it, it actually points at the farm of James and Teresa Arnold. And so the police are investigating a stolen car that's being sold on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And there's an IP address from the posting. And that posting is from this farm. So they drive up and they go there. They had suicide calls. People who were calling in and saying, I'm feeling suicidal and the IP address. And so they'd send the ambulances there.
Oh.
They got accused of pornography. They got accused of tax evasion, all of this stuff.
So, and it was just because default was being translated.
Right. So basically, all these companies, including police forces and stuff like that, they go and they go, well, where is this person? Where is this person? Well, we've got this MaxMind thing. They'll give us an address. We have an IP address, but we'll get a real address. And so they go, okay, go there, get the address, and they don't know that there's a possibility that this is not accurate. And MaxMind doesn't tell you that there's a guess. So what do? They jump in their cars and they go do something at the address. Off they go.
What do you think about what the other decision could have been for?
The other decision could have been that the system says I don't have any information.
Right, like the transparency
Yeah.
in the system. Because, you could go for the North Pole or something, but still, that's a different communication than saying, I don't have it.
If you don't have information, you shouldn't make it up.
Right?
Right, and that's the story. So when you do go and read the story here, people point to this decision here that they picked these two numbers. The actual bad decision is that they picked a default when they didn't have information.
Right.
It could have been any address.
It's got to be transparent.
So you know how they fixed it now? They put it in the middle of a lake. So basically, this is, it was a very innocent idea, like that's the center of America.
Yeah.
It could have been 39 which is the one on the upper near White Rock, or you go down and you end up in Clifford. So we're going to talk about this in class, but we really do want to have some, what is public interest? What is public interest in all?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's very much like we've been talking about that, we kind of have what's good for society in our hearts. But when you're hired by a company that is going to pay you so that they improve their bottom line and that they thrive as a company and that they have arms of the company that does good for climate change and these kinds of things, you're contributing to something that is good. But overall, there are complex equations about thriving companies versus thriving societies that we have to kind of resolve. So I think public interest, for me in my heart, I'm like, hey, let's help out what's going on, make changes, real changes in the world. But the world has realities that are economic drivers, public or government decisions and policies, and we work within those larger ecosystems.
Right.
So we really, meanings of public interest, transparency for sure, making sure we're building things that have the kind of awareness of the situations that we've just talked about as stories.
And this is going to be, so as you know, there's kind of a quiz for each lecture. So we're going to add we're going to ask you as a team. We're going to get you to do the quizzes as teams.
Oh, good idea.
And then we expect you to have this discussion. We'd like you to have this discussion with the team. And then in the class, we want you to come prepared to have some ideas about this.
Yeah.
And so we'll write that up into the attendance quiz that we have via Canvas. Professional ethics. There's a whole bunch of our old, earlier in this chat, we said that we're only 80 years old. Medicine is as old as humans are, but there have been standards. Here's the Hippocratic Oath, which is what doctors take, that they will do their best to help people regardless of a whole bunch of circumstances. There is a code of ethic for professional engineers. The fulfillment of their professional duties, they shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, perform services only in areas of their competence. Now, that second one is interesting because that comes up in the Therac story we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Issue public statements only in an objective, truthful. It's basically, as professional engineers, if you're labeled as an engineer, we're software developers. We'd like to think that we're engineers, but we're software developers. These are good guidances for all of us. I try to live like this, and Yvonne tries to live like this, and we encourage all of you to live by like this. Now, remember, go back to that second one. Perform services only in areas of their competence. We'll come back to that. But there is a story about a Citigroup center where they realized that they had built a building and after they built it, they realized that it's something that's not up to snuff. They kept it secret for 20 years. They fixed it in time. They hacked it, basically, and they hacked it. They kept it quiet.
And it was a student who found it out.
Now, remember we talked about only work in your competence? There's a software engineer from a country that we won't mention, but it's called Canada. That wrote some software for an X-ray machine. It's a company, they had a very successful machine called the Therac 20 that was all manually controlled. And then they were releasing a new version, and they decided that they could use software. And the software developer was a not professionally trained, someone who had taught themselves. And they decided that they were going to build a parallel system. And they were going to have one thread to control the machine and one thread to do the input. And now there's two modes of operation for this machine. One is low power, wide beam, and the other one is narrow beam, high power for targeted things. And because they were doing it in software, they removed a failsafe. On the Therac 20, there was actually a switch that did not allow the high beam to go on unless the lead plates were closed.
Yeah.
But they said, well, we can do that in software. Yeah. So they saved money. There's that saving money part. And by doing it in software, and then it turns out that when you were setting these things, you could actually, there was a race condition between the two threads of the software such that it would turn on the high beam while the lead plates were apart. And then people were coming in and people were walking out with blisters on their thing, stuff like that. So, and this is one of the reasons why I don't work in the medical field, because I'm very scared about the implications of mine.
Safety critical systems now, I think, have many more checks and balances.
Yes.
I would say software engineering in the 80s wasn't maybe as it was common to find people who had trained themselves.
I graduated in '86 with my undergrad.
Oh yeah, I probably was around. I must have been. Yeah.
You graduated the same year, pretty much.
I think I did.
No?
How's that possible? I don't know.
Anyways, whatever. Anyway, we were both in school around that time, studying computer science or whatever we studied.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing the story and I'm like, wow, that's how could that happen? Well, it happened, the person himself was trying to save money for the company. He was trying to, you can save money on this switch,
Yeah.
we do it, and he was well-intentioned and all of that.
Testing wasn't really a big thing back then. There certainly are degrees, professional engineering, software engineering degrees.
Yeah.
So you can be wear the little ring and everything. You can be an engineer as a software engineer, but we're doing software engineering as part of a computer science degree.
I was talking to a software engineer who works for Deutsche Bank in Germany, and he told me that from the time that he finishes writing his code to the time where that code is live, it's 3 months.
Yeah.
3 months of testing.
Well, and right now, I think I heard on the radio this morning that an independent inquiry is going to look into the Rogers failure and how people couldn't call 911, and they're going to go through all this. And there was a lot on the radio this morning about, and I'm sorry, I only heard part of it, but about people saying, well, it's a little late now, but you know what? Actually, it's not all that late now. I mean, they could certainly go back and see, where did this problem manifest itself from? I think they had already said some of it, but a lot of it is secret.
Yeah.
Because,
Well, and one of the way that we learn as human beings is we put our hands on a hot plate and it burns, and we realize we're not going to do that again.
Right.
And these systems that we're building are very complex and testing and stuff like that. One of the advantages, we talked about the disadvantages of ChatGPT and Copilot, but one of the advantages of this is that it can help automate your tests.
oh, yeah. And those are the things that are very easy to miss and get wrong.
Yeah.
So absolutely, yeah. Okay, so on a slightly different note, just to go back to something, well, that's a very interesting font I used for that A. I vision.
Microvision.
Yes, it is. It's just a vision of a more equitable world. And so here's the thing. We've been talking about being part of a bigger ecosystem where maybe you're not making all the decisions for the software that's getting developed, which is a very common thing for a junior software engineer to move into. But maybe you've got a startup and you've got nonprofit organizations that are coming to you with a problem that they want to solve. And they want to hire your team. And this is the way that I want to think about it, because I think we're going to be able to do this for people who want to do it next semester. And they're going to hire your team to write some software. And now all the decisions are yours. You're going to be able to judge this time versus money versus functionality versus privacy versus security. It's all yours. And how do you think about some of these equations? And I think I'm really excited because I feel like the stories that we just went over really helped me think about it for sure. It's like, okay, so what happened there? Oh, well, I totally would have used a default value, but now I understand that has to be transparent to some part of the system that says, this is not a value I know.
Right.
It's a sentinel value here or something to let me know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot here, and I brought the book again, but so I want to talk about this more. And I think that it is a slightly different perspective to be an entrepreneur that's working for a marginalized group versus a software developer in a large organization where people are going to make all sorts of decisions. And I wanted to make that distinction, and I also want to push on the entrepreneurial one, just to have a slightly different perspective on it.
Yeah.
And how to really employ at a level where you have agency and it's your responsibility to let these people know that their privacy maybe is being compromised by the software they're using.
Yeah. Well, the company that I worked at just before I came here, that was an interesting pivot because they sold software that allowed you to track whether someone had opened an email or not, right? And so they were selling that to salespeople. And so salespeople send you an email that they can tell whether they've opened it. And it's a neat little trick. They include a 1x1 pixel with a URL. And when that URL is fetched, they know you've opened the email.
Wow.
So what happened was that there was a company called Siemens who used this to send an internal email to their people so they could see who had opened the email, right? So in the first use, when a salesman sends it to someone, that person isn't required to open that email. So it's useful information for the salesman.
Google Analytics
Yeah.
type stuff.
But if you use it inside of a company, you can say that you have to allow your IP to be tracked because it's a company.
Yeah.
And so now, and I had a struggle with this at that company because I was supporting a system that allowed companies to track where people were reading their email. And so I had to make peace with that because, okay, well, fortunately, the governments of Europe, in this case, are actually fighting that, and they're actually implementing laws that do not allow companies to force that.
Interesting.
Right. So it's a cat and mouse thing, right? It's like, it's useful to know if. So, for example, and this is why it's difficult. I can send an email to everybody about we need you to behave in a certain way, like some HR thing about equitable and building a nicer space to live. And you want to make sure that people have read that, right? And that's okay, because then you can track it and say, hey, Yvonne, you haven't read this email, you haven't signed up. That's a good use of it. But what about if it's just a random email to see where you are?
Yeah. No.
Right. And so it gets very much interesting. In Germany, it's now illegal for people to send email to their employees on the weekend.
Interesting.
Or there's some laws around that, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's all changing. It's all changing.
And I really like that you're bringing into play, laws. A lot of things that we do with technology that we couldn't do last year that we can do this year. There's kind of the laws haven't been developed around it yet. Kind of idea.
Right now, as we speak, there's hearings in the U.S. Senate where they've invited all of the execs from the high tech firms about how do we legislate AI.
Oh, exactly. This is a very big.
It's happening. So you guys should go and watch the news and read about that and see, because they don't know how to do it, and the tech companies don't know how to do it. And the lawmakers are saying, "You help us," which seems like a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
Oh, but they don't know anything either. So they should just ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah.
Do you want me to flip here?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to bring forward a couple of the things that, if you're interested, that you can look at. Resources like the Responsible Tech Guide. And again, there are lots of people, and these are really diverse groups of people. And it's noted here in the text that goes along with this guide. It's all free and accessible. If you want, I can certainly give you links. But the idea here
Actually, why don't you just post the links as the announcement?
Okay, perfect. I'll do that. And I think what I liked about this was, when we were talking about teams getting together to build software, the teams that we were building within our class, we talked about diversity and the need for diversity and really here when it comes to responsible tech, they're really highlighting that the idea here is to make sure that we get as many perspectives on this, because what might be seemingly responsible to you and I, when we're in the same demographic, and we kind of are we have a lot of shared experiences, and it's not the same for people with different cultural experiences, or and so there's just no way for me to say, hey, I totally have empathy for all of these groups and can consider their perspectives. Like, it's just not possible. You need to have the representation. So this is one of the guides. So again, not the sort of the manifestos or something, but just a guide and based on experiences that people have had. And I think I have another one, maybe the same kind of thing here. Yeah, Community Technology Field Guide. This is about co-creating technology with groups. from communities. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we're going to try to look at in the course next semester.
What's the name of the course?
I don't know. I think it's called Community-Driven Software Development, but I'm not exactly sure. It's a topics course and it's kind of experimental. But this course is a prerequisite to us, or to it. And I think the challenge of that course is going to be that we're going to get stakeholders in the room that are community groups, nonprofits and community groups, where the software engineering team that we have will be making all the decisions that require, you know, the awareness of how marginalized groups can be impacted. Now you're working for a marginalized group, and how do you do it fast?
Cool.
So yeah, and then the last line.
Can I sit in on that class?
Oh, I think we're connected at the hip, the good hip or the back hip.
Hopefully it'll be good by then.
Absolutely.
So that's it, I think.
There's